Distinguished President of the Human Rights Council, Madam High Commissioner, this is my first time before this Council in your new capacity, and I know that your leadership will bring enormous added value to the advancement of human rights around the world. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, the Human Rights Council is the epicenter for international dialogue and cooperation on the protection of all human rights, civil, political, economic, social and cultural. Every door you open helps promote opportunity. Every right you secure is another brick in the building of a better world. Your efforts underscore how human rights are a value in themselves and should never be instrumentalized, and that they are also essential to advancing peace and human dignity, to empower women and girls, to deepen development and to spark hope. The rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights belong to everyone, everywhere. They are independent of nationality, gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, belief, or any other status. In my inaugural speech as Secretary-General, I said that prevention must be a priority in everything we do. Human rights are a template for this, building resilience and preventing crises. Every measure to uphold human rights helps ease tensions, deliver sustainable development and sustain peace. Our search for diplomacy is also about promoting human rights. If the ceasefire holds in Odeida, if the recent peace agreement takes root in the Central African Republic, if conflict ends in South Sudan, we will dramatically reduce human suffering and pave the way for much needed justice for victims. Of course, the primary responsibility to uphold and champion human rights rests with Member States. And I'm encouraged by those who are leading the way, especially in these challenging times. One of your key mechanisms is through the Universal Periodic Review, which brings to this Council the realities on the ground and collective commitments for progress. Excellencies, I speak from experience. I lived under the Salazar dictatorship in Portugal, which oppressed not only its own citizens, but also the peoples of the African colonies. And it was the human rights struggles and successes of others around the world that moved us to believe in change and to make that change happen. Human rights inspire and drive progress, and that truth is the animating spirit of this Council. It is the DNA of our organization's founding charter, and it is vital to addressing the ills of our world. Excellencies, let us be clear. The human rights agenda is losing ground in many parts of the globe, but I am not losing hope. Yes, we see troubling trends, but we also see powerful movements for human rights and social justice. Youth, indigenous people, migrants and refugees are demanding their rights and making their voices heard. Journalists are fearlessly getting their stories out. Women are bravely standing up and saying, "Me too." And the largest number of countries in history have now abolished the death penalty or no longer practice it. More people are speaking out about the indispensability of cultural rights for protecting the diversity of beliefs and practices on our planet, recognizing these rights as an essential tool for preserving diversity and our common heritage. And we are seeing greater recognition of the imperative to ensure rights for persons with disabilities. And we have proven the case that it is only possible to fight terrorism successfully when human rights are upheld. On our Human Rights Upfront initiative, it is becoming more systemic, the capacity to spot early signs of crisis and to improve how we respond to them. 1 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in just a generation. More than 2 billion people have gained access to improved sanitation. and more than 2.5 billion people have gained access to improved drinking water resources. The mortality rate for children under 5 has declined by almost 60%. This year makes the 30th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the most widely ratified international human rights instrument, and it is a rallying point for intensifying efforts to ensure we leave no child behind. It is in this overall context of progress and concern that I want to focus on a few human rights challenges as I scan the global horizon. The understanding that underpins these efforts reflects the indivisible and interdependent nature of civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights. Excellencies, let's begin with those that hold up half the sky. We can celebrate tremendous progress in the fight for women's rights and gender equality in recent decades. In every continent, women have been elected to lead and occupy key positions in governments. Gender gaps in education are closing around the world, maternal mortality has dropped by nearly half, and I'm proud that for the first time in UN history, we have already achieved parity in the senior management group and among resident coordinators around the world. But much remains to be done at the UN and around the world. Untold women and girls still face insecurity, violence, and other violations of their rights every day. Doors of economic opportunity remain closed. Glass ceilings abound. And let's never forget that gender equality is a question of power. At present trends, it will take 2 centuries to close the gap in economic empowerment. I do not accept a world that tells my granddaughters that economic equality can wait for their granddaughters' granddaughters. I know you agree. Our world cannot wait. Excellencies, I'm also deeply alarmed by the shrinking civic space in every region of the globe and every corner of the Internet. Activists and journalists are being targeted by surveillance, misinformation campaigns and threats of violence that too often result in actual violence. The immediacy and reach of online threats pose serious challenges to those who wish to speak up. Big data and facial recognition technology are being misused for undue surveillance and interference with free speech, causing a chilling effect and a shrinking space for dialogue. And meanwhile, harassment and attacks are on the rise. Over 1,000 human rights defenders and journalists were killed in the last 3 years. In 2018, 4 environmental activists, mostly indigenous people, were killed every week. We must do more to defend defenders and end reprisals against those who share their human rights stories. And we must hold accountable those who commit such acts. And we must not tolerate the outrageous near impunity for crimes against journalists and other media workers. Respect for human rights is just a game of words if there is no respect for people. And we must also work to close the gap in discriminatory laws and practices that target people in the workplace, in accessing public services, or in the community, simply because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics. Excellencies, we are also seeing a groundswell of xenophobia, racism and intolerance, including rising anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred. Hate speech is a menace to democratic values, social stability and peace. It spreads like wildfire through social media, the internet and conspiracy theories. It is abetted by public discourse that stigmatizes women, minorities, migrants, refugees and any so-called other. Indeed, hate is moving into the mainstream in liberal democracies and authoritarian states alike. Some major political parties and leaders are cutting and pasting ideas from the fringes into their own propaganda and electoral campaigns. And parties once rightly considered pariahs are gaining influence over governments. And with each broken norm, the pillars of humanity are weakened. For our part, I've asked my Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, Adama Dieng, to bring together a UN team to scale up our response to hate speech, define a system-wide strategy, and present a global plan of action on a fast-track basis. We have seen how the debate on human mobility, for example, has been poisoned with false narratives, linking refugees and migrants to terrorism and scapegoating them for many of society's ills. An insidious campaign sought to drown the Global Compact on Migration in a flood of lies about the nature and scope of the agreement. That campaign failed, and it was particularly fitting that the first day of the conference to adopt the Convention coincided with the 70th anniversary of the General Assembly adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This action was soon followed with the adoption of a global compact on refugees. We must re-establish the integrity of the international refugee protection regime and continue to work for common values and international cooperation to reassert rights and help protect people from ruthless traffickers, smugglers and other predators. And in this anniversary year of the Geneva Conventions, let us all recommit to upholding international humanitarian law. Mesdames et Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, poverty is a denial of human rights. Our world has accomplished remarkable progress in fighting extreme poverty, and I would like to thank the Council for its central role in promoting the right to development. But today, the benefits of economic growth are unevenly distributed, and inequalities are deepening within countries and between countries. A handful of people hold as much wealth as half of humanity. The brutal exacerbation of inequalities has not only restricted economic growth, but it is also a source of instability, dissatisfaction, and cause for change. Who cannot see the great number of conflicts and social tensions that have arisen over the past few years? What is the spark that has triggered them? Well, it is violation of economic, social, and cultural rights, inequalities, discrimination, unemployment, the deterioration of the standard of living, and a lack of social services and public services. World leaders have promised not to leave anyone behind. The 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals are our contribution to an equitable globalization, and they are the clearest plan we have to uphold human rights for all. Excellencies, as I conclude, I cannot fail to thank the Human Rights Council for having promptly addressed the greatest challenge facing the world today, climate change. This threat is now intensifying. The world has become hotter, and the threat is progressing more rapidly, and it is more serious. I welcome your mobilization to ensure that human rights are fully taken into consideration in an environmental aspect. More than 150 states have recognized the right to a healthy environment, and yet over 90% of the urban population worldwide breathe unhealthy air. Air pollution leads to 7 million premature deaths every year, of which 600,000 are children. Climate change exacerbates famine. It has a particularly serious impact on marginalized and vulnerable persons. I will convene a climate summit on the 23rd of September, which will bring together political leaders, business representatives, and civil society. And your voice and your support are crucial. Excellencies, the work of this Council aims to push against the boundaries of what is possible, to bring out the best of ourselves and to allow our societies to live up to their full potential. This is why, as Secretary-General, I consider that human rights are at the core of our efforts towards peace and security and aim to promote the right to development, in particular the Sustainable Development Goals. Let us make our world progress with and for human rights. Let us continue to fight. Let us continue to advocate in favor of human equality, human dignity, and human rights for all. Thank you.